Okay, that's cool. I don't even have to hold a microphone. Welcome, everybody. I think it's only appropriate that I begin by telling you a little bit about me and the unlikelihood that I would ever be speaking to a crowd of supporting the marijuana industry. I retired from the California Highway Patrol December 2013 after a 28-year career with the California Highway Patrol. Back in 1978 to 1980, I was an LDS missionary. We're not really big supporters of smoking anything. So I really have a strong law enforcement background and a long law enforcement commitment. I also have very strong moral values, and I think what's very, very interesting is I think that there's a consistency in those values and supporting this kind of legislation. I hope to be able to make that clear by the time I'm finished. Let me tell you my first experience with marijuana. I had been employed by, I was raised in a very small town in Southern California, borax mining town. And one of the cool things that that borax industry used to do was hire college students over the summer. And so we could save money and help pay for our education. And so I was fortunate enough to be part of that program, and I had just gotten a laborer position with the borax mine. And a fellow laborer of mine was unfortunate enough to not have good transportation. So he asked if he could have a ride. I didn't know him very well, and he looked like he was a little bit from a different culture than me. But hey, I said, sure, I'll be happy to give you a ride. So as we got in my car, and we started to go toward the direction of his residence, and he turned to me and he asked me a favor. He said, do you mind if I smoke? And I said, well, I'm not really a smoker, but if you feel you need to smoke and that's something you struggle with, please roll down the window and go ahead. So, he pulled out from his bag what was not a Marlboro. It was actually a marijuana cigarette. I had wanted to be a highway patrolman my whole life. Back in the 1970s, possession of any kind of marijuana was a felony. And I tell you, I was in a panic. I saw he pulled out that marijuana cigarette, and I thought, oh my gosh, I've committed a felony because I'd never seen it. I'd never even been around it. And I was so scared, I was so panicked. I expressed my frustration in the most professional way possible and asked him to please get rid of that. And that was not what I had in mind by him smoking. And I was very, very scared because I knew that when they conduct background investigations for any law enforcement, they ask you, when's the last time you were around drugs and blah, blah, blah. And now I actually had a story to tell. And I wasn't very happy about that. But I had a very strong disapproval of marijuana in any form. And so something changed, though, in my life. That's one of the benefits of getting older, and your life experiences can help shape your perspective and who you are. And what happened to me was it actually happened to a dear friend of mine, and she was a very close friend because her husband was one of my partners with the California Highway Patrol. And we were brand new together, and so we learned the highway patrol function in central Los Angeles. And so we developed this very close, almost a family-type bond. And unfortunately for her, she contracted breast cancer a first time and defeated it. And then it came back a second time just recently. And in part of her defeating it the second time, she needed medical marijuana. And what happened was she was given a prescription for the medical marijuana, and this is in the Sacramento area. And when she went to the dispensary, she said it was one of the most demoralizing experiences of her life. She walked into the dispensary, and the person in the dispensary didn't even recognize the prescription, wasn't sure the pathway to actually dispense what had been asked for. And she said the people that were in there were a kind of group of people that she felt very uncomfortable with because they seemed like they weren't really medical patients. She got the marijuana that she needed, and she said that it was so, so helpful in her condition. It was at that time I realized that there truly is a legitimate use for this substance. And not only that, but we got to do better. This has been the law of the land for over 20 years, but yet the industry has not had any kind of legislative direction, any kind of support to help it have legitimacy. So, because I do believe, I'm not a supporter of recreational marijuana. It should come as no surprise. And I'm not here to debate that issue. What I'm here to do is to explain to you why I'm a supporter of medical marijuana, the process that took place that I was proud to be part of. I was the Republican author, or joint author, for lack of a better term, and there's probably a pun there too. But there were 3 Democrats and I was the Republican side, because we needed Republican support to get this measure through, and I think that's one of the things that was missing. And I was proud to be part of that critical ingredient to get this thing to get off the ground, and because we needed some framework, we needed some help. One of the things that we really tried to do with 266, I guess it has another cool acronym, MMRSA, whatever vehicle that it was, what we needed to focus on, in my opinion, were the public safety aspect versus the local control to still keep, because local communities, San Francisco versus Fresno, they have different perspectives in the way to accomplish that. And I think that local people are the best communicators on how to do that. So we wanted to maintain that piece, and we believe we did that. But here's the part that was the biggest motivator for me, and that is the drugged driving component. As you may guess, with 28 years with the California Highway Patrol, and 20 of my 28 years was spent working the night shift. The night shift to us is when everybody else is asleep, the late p.m. to the early a.m. hours. And during that time period is when there's the highest concentration of impaired drivers. That should come as no surprise either. And I have to tell you, from when I first came on the job in the mid-'80s, driving impaired under alcohol was still kind of accepted. It wasn't that big of a deal. We still kind of joked about it. It was still funny to act. For comedians used skits to where they would act drunk and they would walk to their car. It was still kind of a laughable offense. It wasn't near that big of a deal. But over time, we saw tragedy after tragedy after tragedy that actually started to resonate with each one of us, and we changed our perspective. We changed our framework, we changed our focus, and we tried to change the culture. And I believe that all drugs, not just marijuana, all drugs right now have become such a big player in our society that what's happening is very legitimate users of any kind of drug, often those drugs are very impairing, and people aren't realizing how dangerous they are. And it scares me. And there's one very unique aspect of marijuana. And that's one reason why the enforcement and the piece of this legislation, I believe, is very, very powerful. Is we need research, we need data, we need information to do this right. We don't need to do knee-jerk type of legislation that just becomes anti-marijuana users. We want impaired people to be the ones that we target. And so that was really what I had hoped for. And going back to the unique nature of marijuana impairment, the impairment aspects of marijuana are, quite frankly, limited to a couple of hours. And so right now the testing for marijuana basically recognizes metabolized marijuana. And so it doesn't necessarily indicate the impairment component, which I don't think legislation needs to be focused on just marijuana users. We need to focus on those who threaten the public, who are actually impaired. And one of the things that in law enforcement, they train us to recognize alcohol impairment very, very effectively. And the field sobriety test component and all the aspects that require an officer to make a very fair and objective decision of whether someone's impaired. In alcohol, it's quite simple, but when given the proper training. However, marijuana, in its unique way that it impairs people, we don't have field sobriety tests that are geared towards marijuana impairment. The other thing we don't know is what happens when you mix marijuana with alcohol. I think that that's a whole other area that we need to explore because it's a very common practice. So these are things, and this is really what drove me into this whole arena of talking about trying to get our arms around marijuana, because we've seen other states, for example, we all know that Colorado is experiencing some very, very serious consequences, because I don't think that they took these components really in and gave serious thought to. We've seen a huge rise in their drug-related deaths, especially as they relate to marijuana use. So I think that the framework and the clear rules and the data, what we did in this particular bill is we authorized the University of California at San Diego to study the potential direct impairment levels as they relate to marijuana use. And then, once they're able to gather that data, to take that data and to develop field sobriety test strategies that help officers identify direct impairment. And I think that that's the missing component nationwide. This is not just a problem that's exclusive to our state, but because marijuana use, as we know, is nationwide. And I have to tell you, the reason why I feel so strongly about marijuana impairment is because when you actually experience the tragedy that the reality of impaired driving brings, it really does change you. And especially when the injuries are so severe that they're life-changing forever. Because not only is it sad to the victim, but it's also very, very troubling to the perpetrator, the person responsible. Because they just truly did not believe that they were impaired. And the same is true with alcohol. Most people think that they're okay. We need to do whatever we can to tell people and send a very legitimate and believable message that if you're impaired, don't drive. It's a real simple message. And we need to create that atmosphere that, first off, because there are a lot of people, and some of them happen to be in legislative positions that are very powerful. They don't believe that there are impairing components. They genuinely don't believe that. And so I have to respect that, and I have to develop data, hard, reliable data, objective data that makes the point, first off, that it is impairing. And then our next step has to be, well, how much do you have to smoke? Or how strong does it? Quite frankly, folks, in the 70s, marijuana is much different than the marijuana today. And too many people in our society don't know that. And that is another very critical component. And now we have not just marijuana that's smoked, we have all different ways to ingest it, right? We have the edibles, and we have all these other ways to consume marijuana that have to be included in this discussion. We have to be honest with ourselves because it means lives. It means whether or not someone is going to become permanently injured or killed. It is that serious. And just take it from somebody who has seen these tragedies firsthand. There's no one in this room that wants that kind of tragedy or that would support that kind of a circumstance. So you have to believe in what we're actually trying to do and know that that's for the common good of everybody. It doesn't matter what party you're from. It doesn't matter what religion you are. It doesn't matter what culture you come from, what socioeconomic status you come from. It impacts us all. And so I'm very proud of the fact that we've actually taken steps that are happening right now. This study actually begins in July. There's been a lot of preparation. There's been discussions. I've had the great privilege of being at UC San Diego. I have great confidence in those who are going to conduct this research. And you should be very proud that California is leading the way on this particular this issue. It's amazing to me that we've waited 20 years before we've actually brought any kind of legitimacy to the medical marijuana industry. And what's happened, it's because there hasn't been a real leadership position taken because there's so much fear about marijuana. Marijuana, and any kind of drug, but it's unique because you can grow it. And so that makes it very, very unique in that particular fashion. And what's happened over the 20 years is you've had some very questionable people who've seen the profits. Not all, I'm not saying all, because there's some very hard-working people that have been committed and given their lives to try to help people who have the genuine demand for this particular medication. But it's clouded and it's overshadowed by these other players that have ruined, quite frankly, the legitimacy and the recognition of the legitimate use of medical marijuana. And that is my goal, is to make sure that we make those people like my friend don't feel ashamed that you have to, that this particular medication is available to you and that you need this to deal with this particular uncomfortable circumstance that you didn't ask for. And so I think that we're on the right track. And there's a lot of interest groups, legitimate interest groups that we've tried to include. We've tried to be open. We've tried to be honest. And, you know, I think that this bill is like 60 pages long. So because there are so many complexities and so many issues that have built up over the years and so many things that we need to address to try to legitimize this particular service model. But the good news is I think that we're on the right track now. And I think that it's going to take some time. And I just hope that everyone in here understands that the big threat, I believe, to our society when it comes, to marijuana is the impaired component. I'm not saying that marijuana is the only thing we need to be aware of, but I think it's probably going to be the biggest widespread used substance. I just do. And I think it's continuing to accelerate in a very significant manner. As I said, if we look at the other states and how that the recreational marijuana growth is impacting traffic, it's very significant. And that scares me. We cannot allow that to happen in this state. And I promise you that it will happen. It's not that I'm predicting it. I'm telling you, it's just the natural consequence of this substance. And, you know, there's another very critical component that I'm very worried about, and that is that it's a cash-only industry. One of the things that I did last year before I had any success with this other issue was to send a message to D.C. through a resolution that we need to recognize that there is a legitimate use for marijuana, and these people don't deserve the risk and all the bad things that happen with the cash-only industry. It is really a critical component to the success and the legitimizing of this industry, and so I'm doing everything I can to make sure that that's actually going to take place. I'm hoping that the people who share my perspective on not supporting recreational marijuana know that there's plenty of room to still support medical marijuana. There's room for that because it is completely, in my opinion, it's a completely different topic. And because there's so many recreational blurs and influences, everyone thinks that that's all it is. And I really, really have seen it firsthand to know that there is a significant amount of our population who have circumstances beyond their control, who need the remedy that this industry can bring to them. I'm proud to be part of bringing the legitimacy that this particular part of our population deserves, and I think that we can do it in a way that sends a message to the rest of the country. And that's what I'm hoping for, because a lot of people, whether we like it or not, we're such a populous state, they look to California as a model. And so we have a certain degree of responsibility to be leaders on this particular issue. And I'm saddened that it took us 20 years, but better late than never. And so now we just need to really take this issue and be very proud of it. You know, I've got work to do in my circles, probably more than the Democrat circles or people who are more socially tolerable to issues like this, because darn it, we have to get rid of some of the stereotype viewpoints that we have as a culture, and this is one of them. And I think that if we do our due diligence, not only will we save lives through the drug driving measure, but we'll allow people who are in conditions that are very, very disheartening, who deserve the remedy that marijuana brings, and too many of them won't go get that remedy because of what we've let happen to the perception of certain dispensaries. So I'm going to be in the back room if you need me, and I was told that when I first spoke that I was supposed to begin about when I'm quitting here, and I happen to be quitting right about at a very significant time in this industry, 420. And so thank you for your time, everybody.